D'accord. On commence. Les premiers. Bon matin.
Bonjour.
Salut, ça va bien?
Bonjour.
Salut, ça fait plaisir.
Bonjour, ça va bien?
Bonjour.
Salut, bon matin. Bonjour. Bonjour.
Donc, je vais commencer en vous disant les règlements de présentation. Est-ce que vous préférez que je lise en français ou en anglais? Donc, chaque équipe dispose de 20 minutes afin de présenter son cas au juge. J'afficherai un carton pour les 10, les 5, les 2 dernières minutes et les 30 dernières secondes de la présentation. Lors des dernières secondes du discours, j'indiquerai à l'aide de mes deux mains le nombre de secondes restantes. Si vous n'avez pas terminé votre présentation après 20 minutes, elle se verra arrêtée afin de passer à la période de questions. Une période de questions d'une durée maximale de 5 minutes est allouée au jury à la fin de la présentation. Veuillez noter que vous ne pouvez en aucun temps dévoiler le nom ou la provenance de votre université. Je laisse maintenant les juges se nommer. Vous pourrez ensuite débuter votre présentation.
Donc, Julie Pichette, directrice logistique chez Métro.
Michel Turner, directeur principal ressources humaines Métro.
Simon Bernier, directeur des ventes et de la logistique pour La Fernandière.
Pascal Forget, professeur à l'UQTR ici en génie industriel.
Mathieu Budin, Aéroport de Montréal, développement des concessions et opérations.
First things first, Joshua Aguilas and myself would like to thank you all for coming out. A lot of you have come a long way and made the trip out for early this morning. We'd also like to say hi to everybody tuning in online and thank you for Toy Riyadh for hosting this event. Jumping right into the presentation, I want to start off with a little story. I personally remember specifically a shirt that I had growing up. It was my absolute favorite shirt. I wore it as much as I possibly could. I started to grow, however, and the shirt didn't quite fit me properly. I even took it to the tailor to have it changed to fit my growing body. But eventually it was time to realize that I needed to let the shirt go. I needed to move on and find myself a new favorite shirt. We believe that today Metro is facing a similar situation. Not with clothes, however, with the Montreal warehouse for fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. Today we'd like to go through a current snapshot of the situation at hand for Metro. Next, the mandate for what we've been brought here today to do for you, as well as an analysis, a recommendation specifically for what you can do to improve the situation, as well as a very thorough implementation plan to seamlessly integrate these operations into your current policies so that there's not a disruption in any of your grocery stores and your customers are always happy. So first off, we'd like to say, from the words of the case, Metro is a leader in its industry. What does it take to be a leader? Continuous improvement, innovation, being at the forefront of the game, being able to continuously offer products to your customers that they want. Currently being able to match the demand with what you're supplying. There's one little catch in the operations of Metro right now, and that is in the warehouse in Montreal. We currently have an old building. It's decades old, and it's close to its maximum capacity. This means that with no possibility to expand this old building, pretty soon there's going to be no way to expand Metro's business in the fruits, vegetables, and dairy products within Montreal. So we do have a bit of a positive in this situation because the lease is up in 2 years. And that means we have an easy way to get out of this situation and bring new innovative things to Metro. I'll now pass it off to Aguilas to go through notre mandat.
Donc pourquoi sommes-nous ici aujourd'hui? La réponse est bien simple. Nous voulons effectuer la conception à un haut niveau de nouveaux centres de distribution de fruits, légumes et produits laitiers pour vous, Métro. Nous aurons 3 considérations aujourd'hui tout au long de notre présentation. Alors, je vous demanderai de juste toujours les garder dans votre tête. Commençons par la capacité, la flexibilité et finalement la longévité, c'est-à-dire maintenir cette capacité à long terme. Je passerai maintenant la parole à Joshua qui va avoir Brian pour débuter notre analyse.
To go through a quick qualitative analysis, to move the production, the warehouse from the east end of Montreal to Laval, there would be some unfortunate consequences for employees, namely the commute. It's close enough in proximity that employees wouldn't have to uproot their entire family. They'd just be able to commute from, and some employees might even end up having a shorter commute. However, the employees are unionized, so we have to keep in mind that they're used to being considered in each and every step of the decision process. They like transparency and they like to know that they're being treated fairly. And lastly, an important point to consider is that 63% of the employees work evening or night shifts. This is important to consider when Montreal is developing a new metro system that takes it out to Laval, so public transport would be a very useful tool for a lot of the employees coming from Montreal and the outlying areas. The only problem with the night and evening shifts is that currently the public transportation cuts off at 11 p.m. So there's a little bit of an issue with limitation in the public transport at the moment. Next up, we have the computer technology. Currently, the EXE system is at the top of the line, and Metro has it in place for its storage and keeping track of all of its inventory. However, many of the functions are not active. It's not being used to its maximal efficiency, so this is a little bit of a shortfall that could help Metro be more aware of its inventory levels and integrating that with the MOST system, which is not being used at all as a forecasting tool, might find it to be advantageous to implement these computer systems more effectively. This is also important because the produce industry, you're dealing with perishable items, you're dealing with people who've been in the industry for a very long time and they know what they're talking about. However, eventually, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 100 years down the line, these employees are going to need to be replaced in some sense. Having forecasting tools in place is a great way to assure that Metro continues to have top quality produce and the appropriate amount of demand. Therefore, these computer technologies can also be used as a succession planning tool. I'll now pass it off to Joshua for a little bit more of an analysis.
Okay, so firstly, we started by looking at what your current capacity is at the Montreal warehouse and looking if it will be sufficient to provide the capacity that you will need in the coming years. So if we look at the analysis we did, we basically took the 6 months of 2011 that's been provided to us to look at our average daily inventory for the different kind of produce that you store in your warehouse. And also taking into consideration that your peak factor, that like your average is like on the average, but on peak days or on peak weeks, like you'll need more capacity to be able to absorb the fluctuations. And also with the 10-year expansion factor, one of your requirements was to be able to use this warehouse for the next 10 years and having enough capacity to do that. And with your wanting to expand by 4%, your product offering every year, we compounded this to the factor in there to be able to maintain that capacity for the coming years, which gave us the required amount of capacity per pallet. And we've calculated the shelf amount just to be more representative of how much shelving or how much space you need in this warehouse to meet your requirements by 16 pallets per shelf, which would be either 2 shelves, one next to each other with the beams, or two in depth. That gives us the following amounts for the shelf requirements, and you currently see that your current shelving capacity is under almost every area compared to what you would need. So therefore, giving us a total of capacity of 462 shelves right now, but we need 590 to be able to sustain that growth within the next 10 years. So the main takeaway from this is that the Montreal warehouse has insufficient capacity for the future growth that you're expecting and that you want to do, and that will impact negatively in your product offerings and the quality of your services. So with keeping that in mind, one of our tasks was to put up the racking order for the new Laval warehouse, given that the current racking system is too damaged to be able to be transferred. So we went on the assumptions that per shelf, so 16 pallet capacity, going at being able to store 4 levels of shelves high, like it is currently the case in your Montreal warehouse. You'd need the following components per shelf. So multiplying that by the number of shelves that you need in each of your categories, which gives us the total amount of the components required to be able to supply that demand for your shelving. Now we'll jump into the recommendation as far as different consideration that we wanted us to touch upon considering the new construction of this new warehouse. First of all, the size of the building will need to be bigger than what you currently have to be able to maintain that capacity. We've estimated, like with the growth factor, that you'll need 30% more space because of the growth in the future years in your capacity. So that your Laval would have to be 162,000 square foot as opposed to 124,000 square foot. Some of the consideration with the layout of this new warehouse, it'll be similar to what you currently have. If the height permits it, we might do the, where the office spaces are, we might do it on 2 level to maximize the usage of space. You have more space in there. Of course, on the main warehouse level, it would only be 1 level to be able to do the shelves. Also, with the wrapping section of the packaging section of the warehouse, we'd like to have maybe a bigger proportion in there, because we've seen that with the old warehouse, you had problems with adding new machines and adding capacity, and it seems like it's kind of like a bottleneck for your operations. So we'd like to have it bigger and more space. Also, the height of the building, well, currently in Montreal is fixed, it's what it is. For the Laval, we'll probably have them the same height, or maybe a little more height to be able to give us that 2-level of office space, depending on what the construction code requires for that kind of construction. As far as the number of docks, we went on the assumption that the docks that are within the building, within the area, are the inbound docks, so where you receive your produce, and then you have the outbound docks, which are from the outside of the buildings that you can both use. And with the 30% increase in capacity that we require again, instead of 30 outbound, we need 39, and instead of 12 inbound, we need 16 inbound doors. You might not require all of this right now, but it's harder to change in the future. So for that 10-year span, this will make sure that you have enough capacity going forward. As far as the main area, mostly the office space, as I've said, we'll grow it. It's about we've estimated it to be about 7% right now, so we go from about 87,000 square feet to about 11.3 thousand square feet. And again, do it on the 2 levels, and probably having more offices, because likely you'll probably add some foremen and some more employees as you grow your business. As far as labor requirement, there was no indication that there was a lack of labor with your current capacity, but with that 4% increase in produce, of course you'll need more employees going forward. So we propose that adding 8 additional employees per year within the proportion of the current amount of employees you have. So the packaging is about 80 out of 216, so then you'd probably add more packaging than other categories receiving, and you'd probably add a foreman every 2 years, or as is required to monitor that labor. Also, we'll continue with the next factor, so I'll just pass it on to Brian, our technology expert, to discuss this factor.
So coming back to the computer system that's in place in Montreal, EXE is in place and it's being used at a very limited rate. What we want to do is continue that same use of EXE in Laval. However, we want it to be more developed. We want to bring someone in to train the employees to be able to use it, to input all the data into the EXE system, which will help us to be able to use the most system in the future for planning and forecasting. This might cost a little bit to implement, to be able to train the employees, and take a little bit more time. However, like I mentioned before, this can be a great tool for succession planning, because you don't need to necessarily pass down the knowledge that each employee has. You can also use the forecasting tool and be able to see the raw numbers. In that sense, there'll be less of a gap between one employee to the next in those key forecasting positions. So that's why we want to integrate the EXE and the MOST system in Laval.
Also, now for the mobile equipment, so essentially your forklifts and trucks, you currently have 61, and we've assumed that they're in fairly good shape. If they're not, we'd probably need to replace them. But with the 30% growth over the 10 years, we'll need to add at least 2 trucks per year, probably more in the single pallet trucks. Also, you might want to consider the double pallet trucks. We're not sure at this point if it's a more viable option as far as productivity and less costly for current operations, but it might be something to look into maybe implement within the new trucks in the coming years, if that proves to be more efficient. As far as the number of rooms for bananas, we currently have 16 rooms, and with the implementation of the increase of capacity that we require, we need about 33 rooms. So you can see from that the Montreal space that we have for banana would need to be doubled. One of the more reasons to be able to move to this new location. And also the shelving order, I've just previously mentioned it. The current ones that are in the Montreal warehouse are damaged, so we need to buy new ones for the whole warehouse. And the layout of the shelving units would probably be very similar to what you have. Maybe like if it's more long, then adding more rows or making the rows longer. But regardless, they'll be very similar to not change the way things are done right now, as it proves to be fairly efficient.
Donc évidemment, en faisant le transfert du centre de distribution de Montréal à Laval, quelques coûts devront être pris en compte. Premièrement, nous avons estimé un coût de transfert des stocks à 270 000 $. Donc évidemment, vous allez avoir des stocks dans votre centre de distribution à Montréal que vous devrez transférer à Laval une fois que vous ouvrez le nouveau centre de distribution. Ensuite, nous allons avoir la formation des employés estimée à environ 250 000 $. Ceci va vraiment inclure toute la formation nécessaire afin que les nouveaux employés s'habituent avec le nouveau matériel à Laval. Finalement, nous allons avoir un coût d'environ 100 000 $ pour le transfert d'équipements. Comme mentionné par mon collègue Joshua, quelques équipements en ce moment sont endommagés, mais nous croyons que certains pourront être transférés vers le nouveau centre de distribution. Donc maintenant, nous allons passer à la mise en œuvre. Donc comment allons-nous vraiment mettre en œuvre la solution que nous avons apportée aujourd'hui? Donc pour la phase de planification, qui sera vraiment la phase à court terme, nous allons donner un horizon temporel de 0 à 6 mois, donc aujourd'hui à 6 mois. Les parties prenantes, vous allez vous en rendre compte, seront évidemment vous, métro, suivi d'un ingénieur et finalement du gouvernement municipal. Donc, premièrement, nous devons contacter un ingénieur et finaliser les plans du centre de distribution. Donc, juste finaliser les plans comme tels afin d'assurer que vous avez toutes les chambres et évidemment, juste avoir tout ce qui est nécessaire dans le nouveau centre de distribution à Laval. Nous allons obtenir évidemment les permis de construction. En ce moment, vous avez acquis le terrain à Laval, mais vous aurez besoin d'un permis afin de faire la construction de ce nouveau centre de distribution. Et finalement, vous allez débuter la préparation des employés au déménagement. Donc, nous voulons travailler aussi avec les syndicats afin vraiment d'assurer que les employés soient prêts pour le déménagement de Montréal à Laval. Donc, pour la phase de construction, qui aura un temps temporel d'environ 6 mois à 1 an, nous allons débuter la construction du nouveau centre de distribution. Donc, nous avons une contrainte de temps d'environ 2 ans. Donc, nous devons vraiment assurer que le nouveau centre à Laval soit opérationnel dans 2 ans. C'est pour ça que nous voulons assurer la construction du nouveau centre le plus tôt possible. Nous allons activer les fonctionnalités manquantes et la formation des employés quant au système d'information en gestion, comme mentionné par mon collègue Brian. Et finalement, nous allons vraiment garder une communication constante avec les clients, avec les employés, juste afin de s'assurer que le changement se fait vraiment le plus facilement possible. Finalement, dans la phase d'opération, donc qui sera, je m'excuse, pas 1 an et plus, mais 2 ans et plus. Donc une fois que vous allez avoir votre nouveau centre d'opération à Laval. Donc il sera opérationnel évidemment 100%, puisque celui à Montréal a une échéance, donc le contrat finit après 2 ans. Nous allons embaucher environ 8 nouveaux employés annuellement, comme mentionné par mon collègue Joshua. Nous allons faire l'évaluation et le perfectionnement de ce nouveau centre à Laval, s'assurer que tout va bien avec les employés, vous avez tout le matériel nécessaire. Et finalement, nous allons changer l'horaire des sans-emploi, comme mentionné plus tôt par mon collègue Brian. Donc les parties prenantes seront évidemment vous, métro, les employés, ainsi que garder une communication constante avec le syndicat. Je passe maintenant la parole à mon collègue Brian pour les indicateurs clés de performance.
So just so we know that what we're putting in place is actually a positive step forward for Metro, there are a few indicators here that we want to be able to reference as we go on into the operational phase of this warehouse. So first, in capacity, we want an increase of 30% capacity. As mentioned by Josh, this needs to increase our business so that we have the ability to store and expand our products. That brings me to flexibility. The capacity to store additional products, being able to supply different and varied products to our customers That's what you really want to be able to do moving forward. And lastly, sustainability. Metro is an industry leader right now, and nobody wants that to change. So sustainability for the next 10 years is at the forefront of our intention here with the expansion to Laval. So being able to increase our capacity, increase our supply to all the metros, and increase the number of metros around Quebec and Canada. So just like sometimes a shirt doesn't fit anymore, the Montreal factory is at max capacity. There's no sense in taking it to the tailor because there's nowhere else for it to grow. We'd like you to move your operations to Laval just like buying a new shirt so that you're innovative and maintain your position at the top of the grocery game. We thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate any questions you may have at this point.
Just so I know, how are you going to pay for your new shirts? How is, because we're expanding a new warehouse, this is going to cost a lot of money. What would be the saving, or how can I justify that new DC?
So firstly, Metro on a large scale is way bigger than just the sole warehouse in Montreal. So we're not looking necessarily just transfer the cost from Montreal to Laval. It's looking at Metro as a whole to absorb the cost. So for financing this project, hopefully Metro can have financing from a bank to be able to mortgage it. You've purchased the land, so now it's not a lease venture, it's now a building venture, it's a capital asset moving forward. So it's worth it in the long run to build an effective complex, and hopefully Metro, with financing from the bank, is willing to expand that way.
In your scenarios, did you think about the fact that you have another distribution center in Quebec City? What would happen with this center?
Because of the nature of the goods, perishable items, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products coming from Quebec and distributed all over Quebec, Quebec City and Montreal are pretty far away from each other in that sense. So we don't necessarily see the two of them as something to be working as a tandem. They're kind of autonomous of each other. So just because there's one in Quebec City doesn't necessarily mean there shouldn't be an increase in capacity in Montreal.
Do you believe it's going to be a good option for Metro to regard this scenario regarding Quebec City at DC? To move in Montreal to save money and get everything under the same DC?
As my understanding is, they probably both have very different, they supply very different stores, and they have very different patterns of how much goods they supply, of like, given the nature of them and given the nature that you have like 6 or 7 different sections within the warehouse. So I don't think at this point that you would save money by like having just one big one in Montreal instead of having the one in Quebec and then the one in Montreal. And it'd be an even bigger investment in order to make the one in Montreal. You do have the land, you do have maybe the option of expanding the one in Montreal in the future in Laval, as you don't have this option currently with Montreal because you're leasing it, so you're at the mercy of the owner of the building. So you do have this option, but given the fact that they're 2 different distribution networks and they have different consumer patterns, consumer requirements, we think that it's best to keep them separated for logistics and kind of strategy reasons.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a small question for you. Sure. You mentioned that you would like to use more functionalities of EXE, and we should use most. What exactly, which kind of gains you would get from using these functionalities, and what functionalities exactly?
Again, going back to the fact that fruits, vegetables, dairy is all perishable, the forecasting tool of EXE, the forecasting of most facilitated by EXE is really the part we'd like to focus on, so that there's no waste and so that you know how much to order at what time. You're at the mercy of the environment with fruits and vegetables, so just having a better understanding of what is required at what time of the year for the demand within Montreal and Quebec would be a very good tool for Metro to have. So it's just being able to plan better. That's really the focus of EXE.
Thank you.
No questions.
Again, the capacity of the sizing, what did you base it on? Is it on SKU or on inventory?
The inventory per day. It was on the inventory because at the end of the day, that's how much you have at a given time within the warehouse. And given the peak factor, you want to have more to be able to absorb that, and as well with the expansion over the years. So we look at the shelving amounts that we have, the shelving amounts that we required, and then that's how we based our analysis as to how much shelving space we would need to meet the future needs of Metro for this distribution center.
And is it worth it to build on the peak?
It gives you, again, our evaluation criteria were mostly flexibility and looking long-term and looking at what you want to do. I don't think you want to build another one in 10 years, you might want, but having the peak gives you this flexibility of being...
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time, guys. Have a great day. Thanks.
Au revoir. Good job.